All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be just reviewing last week's City Council meeting summary, looking at the timestamps, listening in just to kind of quality control this article, but also kind of prime ourselves for this week's City Council meeting and practice a little bit of streaming around that. So let's go ahead and start the audio. Let's see. I want to make sure, though, that we've got the right and sharing audio. That should work. Okay.
And the ability to get information.
Basically, this meeting covered, first of all, the blue code blue sites and volunteer needs, and also the point in time count on the homelessness discussion. So we'll start off with those two issues.
And the ability to get information, to request to be on their list. They will email you back with their needs the day of Code Blues. So I will try and make sure I get the new link to the council office again in our office and make sure that's distributed as widely as possible. Really need volunteers, because without volunteers, they cannot open the Code Blues sites. And so far, they've only had volunteers for one of the two sites that they need. So we're really trying to get that out to the public. Any questions?
Councilmember Young.
Thank you. So I just want to echo your thanks. I had the pleasure of doing the point in time count with Katie, as well as other representatives, both from city council staff and city staff in the mayor's office. Just really grateful for the fact that the city shows up for that in terms of providing that partnership to the county to be able to gather information. Just to quickly share a couple of pieces that I think are relevant to this body and the conversation. One of the most difficult statements that was made in one of our conversations was that as the weather gets warmer, some of the individuals experiencing homelessness were lamenting that because they were like, our Code Blue sites shut down. And that was something that they don't look forward to in terms of recognizing that we have that much pressure on the system. So I'm wondering in that regard if you have any updates related to kind of what our future next steps are, recognizing there's only so much information we know at a given time, but just curious if there's anything that we can share with the community as we look ahead to addressing that larger need.
Yeah, thank you, council member. Currently, the Code Blue statute is statewide, and it's in code. It was done the last 2 years. They've made some modifications. It does kick in at 18 degrees Fahrenheit. That includes wind chill. So if you have 25 degrees with 7 mile-an-hour winds, then you hit the threshold, right? So you're correct. If it's 20 degrees and no wind, it's not a Code Blue night. But if it's 18 degrees, then no wind it is. So it's a very fine line there. And it's really unfortunate that on some nights when it's very cold, it doesn't meet criteria and we can't get people in. There has been a desire to not rely on Code Blue beds. The intent of the winter overflow as a whole, with all the additional beds we have all winter long, was to meet the wintertime need, and Code Blue was meant to be that really last-ditch emergency option for the really worst nights for a small number of people. What's been difficult is the inability to get enough of those base beds 24/7 during the wintertime means that instead of having 900 of those day in, day out 24/7 beds, you may have 600. And then you have to rely on, instead of 50 Code Blue beds, you need to rely on 250 Code Blue beds to get enough, right? It's not the ideal for anybody. Right, what's happening right now is in our safety and security plan, we did identify that the state is still actively seeking land for a permanent shelter. And that would be a very large campus of at least, they're identifying, say, 1,200 individuals or beds they could have there. We identified that because that might take more time, that we wanted to help with an interim plan in the next, we said 12 to 24 months, sort of a window there. Those discussions are happening daily right now between ourselves, the State Office of Homeless Services, and others. I don't have anything to officially announce at this point, unfortunately, but I will say that it is a daily sort of event going on to try and work through all the details that would make that happen. And as soon as we can possibly announce something, we would love to do so.
Thank you for the update on progress. I know, like I said, everyone's really hopeful for, an announcement. To me, it's really helpful as well just to hear that those conversations continue, so that we're able to just share with the greater community all the amazing work that you're doing and that the city's doing to be able to help support our partners at the state in arriving at that outcome. So thank you for that update.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for that. The second item on our agenda. Is an ordinance change for mixed use or MU zoning consolidation text and map amendment. And for that, we have Nick Tarbett from the City Council. We have Daniel Echeverria from Planning, Senior Planner, Chrissy Gilmore, and Kelsey Linguist, also from Planning. See you all.
So I think, well, instead of me saying something that they'll just have to repeat for quick intro, I'll just say we have this scheduled for a full hour.
Yes.
Planning has about 30 minutes of presentation, but they've said you can jump in at any time and ask questions to keep it going, so they don't have to write them down and have them at the end. So feel free to jump in when you do have questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll jump in. I'm Chrissy Gilmore with Planning. We are really excited to be here today. This is a big proposal, and we're excited that it's made it to you, and we get to present that today. Today, we're going to go overview the mixed-use consolidation proposal and then get your input on some key questions and then just general input. Next slide, please. So the goals. So this proposal is to update the zoning ordinance and the zoning map by consolidating 26 commercial mixed-use and form-based districts into 6 new mixed-use districts. This is for a few reasons. First is to support local businesses and residents by creating new mixed-use areas that will enhance neighborhood accessibility and walkability. And then this effort will also streamline our zoning code by reducing the total number of regulations. This will assist staff in creating a more manageable code, and then will also ease the understanding and accessibility for the public. And then as planning staff, as we were developing this proposal, we had several overarching goals and keys to success. The first was to ensure that we were maintaining existing property rights as much as possible, which sometimes, as you'll see, results in an increase in development potential where appropriate. For example, in some mixed-use zones, there will be a slight increase in building height or a reduction in setback requirements compared to current regulations. We also wanted to minimize creating new non-conforming uses or buildings, and did a full analysis to make sure that we were keeping what works and what is working well. And as part of this, we are hopeful that the proposed regulations will support more by right development and remove barriers to existing mixed-use development. Next slide, please. So to recap the public engagement process, we started this process with several briefings with the City Council, Planning Commission, and the Community Council chairs. After those briefings, we launched a public website, held 8 walking tours, which I know many of you attended, 2 open houses, and tabled at a few community events. As part of the open houses, we also held a youth open house component with those, with more than 100 youth attending from elementary age all the way up to high school. On top of that, we sent out several thousand notices to people in the rezone areas and around those affected properties, directing them to the website. And we also held office hours 4 days a week in the fall, where property owners could meet one-on-one planners to address specific questions about their property and how this affects them. And then as part of the Planning Commission review, we held 10 briefings and 2 public hearings, actually 3 public hearings at the end. And now we're here today. Next slide, please. So just for the presentation today, we are going to go over the consolidated and proposed zones, the different forms and standards, where these zones are located, setbacks, design standards. There is some changes to the M1 and the transitional overlay, and then we'll touch on questions for City Council. Next slide, please. So As you know, we're consolidating 26 zones into 6 mixed-use zones. We try to combine zones of similar scale, primarily by height, to retain existing property rights, like I already mentioned. These, you can see on the slide, there's the different zones listed. I won't, name each one, but you can see that we started the MU2, which is generally 2 to 3 stories, and then stepping all the way up to MU11, which is about 11 to 12 stories. You can see how these zones scale on the graphic on the slide. The slide also highlights at what threshold design review is required. So in the MU3, it's at 35 feet and would generally cover a 4th floor. And then in the MU8, it's at 75 feet, generally covering the 7th floor. And then MU11, it's after 85 feet. And design review requires approval from the Planning Commission for reference. And then next slide. So building forms. The mixed-use zones are form-based zones, so they regulate development by building form rather than applying the same height for each structure. So like I mentioned, the setbacks and heights are going to be based on the specific form. It's divided into 3 key categories, with each zone having their own specific zoning regulations. So the cottage development, urban house, and 2-family forms typically have the same setbacks. And then row house is in their own category. And then storefront, vertical mixed use, and multifamily will share their own set of regulations. Okay, next slide. And then general bulk and massing. So the consolidation attempted to make setbacks consistent across the various zones with some limited exceptions. Generally, the required minimum setbacks are higher in the lowest intensity mixed-use zones where there is more of a development pattern of larger yards. And then the higher intensity zones have smaller setbacks where there is a more urban context. Front yard setbacks were pushed closer to the street in favor of appropriate buffering in rear yards. And then some of the larger side or rear setbacks in the existing zones have been changed into setbacks that only apply when abutting a lower scale zone. So for an example, if a property is abutting a single or 2-family zone, they would have a larger rear yard setback, but otherwise the setback might be limited or there could be no rear setback depending on the building type. And then for height, proposed heights generally remain the same to preserve existing development rights. And where there are existing differences, the changes lean towards allowing slightly more height rather than less. So for example, in the MU2 zone with height limits ranging from 25 to 30 feet in those existing zones, the MU2 zone itself will allow 30 feet of height. So some of those zones are getting an extra 5 feet of building height.
Chair, I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because I know there's some applications that I would want to better understand. Would that setback, if there was a smoking area, for example, and it abutted a single-family residency, would then there be limitations at all? Is there anything in our code that what you're proposing that would help limit that?
We do have outdoor dining requirements, so it kind of depends exactly how that would fit in, if it's part of an outdoor dining, but there are specific setbacks that would need to take place for that. There's also a landscape buffer, a 10-foot landscape buffer that you're not allowed to have paving or other structures in. It has to be that vegetation. I'm trying to think if I'm missing any other points on that one.
I was just thinking
and the
in
health
District 4,
department.
I've seen some proposals where they'll share in the plans that there'll be a smoking area. Maybe it's not dining, it's not restaurants, but just housing and then a specific area. And I was just curious if that's been considered in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll have to look at the county health regulations and see if there's anything in that. I can't think of anything else specific on this proposal.
That's a concern that keeps coming up. I'd love to hear, and maybe it's not something that we can, in this zoning consolidation, talk about, but just something to consider. Thank you.
We'll look into it. Okay. And then next slide, please. So there are some general standards that apply to every zone. The first is that the proposed regulations include a general provision for allowing lots without public street frontage. This situation is common with townhome developments where units or lots are not located directly next to the public sidewalk, which you can see on that graphic on the slide. These developments usually have to go to the Planning Commission for approval. This process creates a time and financial barrier to new housing development, with the addition, which Daniel and Kelsey will discuss, with the addition of design standards that are being proposed through this process. We believe that this Planning Commission process is not necessary to mitigate the impacts of those developments. So this proposal does allow or removes that requirement for lots without street frontage. And then open space. Besides basic yard setback requirements, open space was not previously required in all of the associated zones. And so this proposal has a general standard of 10% of the lot area will apply to all the mixed-use zones, with some building forms having additional requirements of 20 to 25%. The code also requires a minimum dimension for at least one of the open space areas of 15 by 15 feet to ensure usability and to help reduce the amount of runoff into the storm drain system. And with that, Daniel will now cover the specifics of each zone.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Romano.
While we're on open space, Chrissy, I'm wondering if you can help me understand. So the open space is for every zone and every building type. And can you tell me what qualifies as open space? Because I know there were some zones where we were allowing things like vertical gardens or rooftop gardens to count as open space, and other zones where we were not. Where are we at on these?
Yeah, so it does have a specific list of what counts as open space, and rooftop amenities still do count as open space. And then there are a specific list of what must be included in that open space of, I think they can pick between a few items like benches or other shade structures and different amenities that must be part of that open space. But yes.
You don't happen to know the section that's in, do you? You can get it to me afterwards, it's fine.
Yeah, let's send it to you.
All right, can we jump to the next slide?
Mr. Chair?
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
good.
Councilmember Pui.
Quick question on that previous slide. When we're talking about open space and vegetation, is the suggested language updating to talk a little bit about drought-resistant vegetation and not necessarily grass? Or I just want to make sure that we're not encouraging necessarily a lot of grass when we are, in almost a constant drought in Salt Lake. That said, there is need sometimes for open space that has grass. So I just wonder if the language this includes some encouragement on this matter.
Yeah, so similar to the recent landscape ordinance changes, you can use tree canopy coverage toward the vegetation coverage, so you don't need to necessarily cover it with just like a turf area.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, can we jump to the next slide? All right, so I'm just going to cover where the zones are located and their basic standards. So we've grouped them here into two zones on a page because each of the two zones have pretty similar standards. So the lowest scale zones, again, are the MU2 and 3. We're looking at 2 to 3 stories for MU2 and 3 to 4 for MU3. The MU2 zone is consolidating the very lowest scale commercial zones we have, which are the SNB, RB, and CN zones. These are located on lower scale corridors and at intersections, the heart of many single family neighborhoods in the city. So you see these at 9th and 9th, 15th and 15th, and along 1100 East. The MU3 is consolidating the higher of the low scale zones, including the commercial or the community business zone and the residential mixed use 35 zone. So the CB generally covers neighborhood adjacent grocery stores and shopping areas. And the RMU 35 covers a mix of properties, mostly near busier commercial-focused intersections, especially on the west side area. Next slide. So as Chrissy noted, there are 3 main building form categories. For the mixed-use storefront and multifamily category, we're looking at the left diagram. Heights here are allowed up to 30 feet in the MU2 and 35 to 40 feet with the MU3. And for MU2, this is a slight increase from the 25 to 30 feet allowance under the current zones, and it's about a 5 to 10 foot increase for the MU3 from the current zones. For setbacks, there's limited to no front setback requirement, with more generally required in the rear. For townhomes, these are shown on the top right. You're looking at a little more setback in the front and rear to ensure the residential uses have more privacy and buffering. And then on the lower right, you have the lower scale forms, urban house, cottage, and two-family, with the highest setbacks, again, to ensure adequate privacy for these types of uses. And then there's a few different components to help ensure compatible scale with neighborhoods in these two zones. We have a floor area threshold that triggers design review with the Planning Commission, essentially getting a compatibility review for larger structures, and a lot size width limit of 110 feet that applies to all of the forms to, again, help ensure smaller structures. And then for the MU3, design review is triggered for anything over 35 feet in height, so that extra height would also get some Planning Commission review. Next slide. So the next step up in the zones are the MU5 and 6. They're consolidating several different zones. For MU5, it's covering multiple form-based and TSA zones, including in Central 9th and along transit corridors like 400 South and North Temple. And then MU6 is covering a similar mix of zones, including around the edge of the Sugar House Business District core, and again, some major corridors like 400 South and North Temple. Next slide. So for the MU5 and 6 zones, you're looking at 55 to 65 feet of height.
So to recap the public engagement process, we started this process with several briefings with the City Council, Planning Commission.
These are mostly design requirements for building facades, for things like windows, doorways, and ground floor use requirements. The MU zones have very similar standards to the existing TSA and Sugar House Business District zones, just for example. The big change here is the expansion of these standards to so many new areas of the city that previously had few design requirements. Previously or currently, there's a number of zones that simply to have a requirement for a single door on a facade with no other features on that facade. So the proposed standards are pretty consistent across the MU zones, with the exception of the urban house, two-family, cottage forms that are mostly exempt from design requirements just due to state code. Next slide. So just to give you some examples of design standards, there's doorway requirements every so many feet along a facade, minimum amounts of glass required for both the ground floor and upper levels of the facade, durable exterior materials that apply to a certain percentage of the facade, ground floor active use requirements, meaning uses besides parking and storage that apply to a percent of the facade. This is generally 75% facade length. There's also a maximum facade length, which is generally 200 for most MU zones, and then 110 feet for the lower MU2 and 3 zones. And then equipment and service area screening, just so we don't get those types of uses directly on the front facades of buildings. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kelsey.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so to answer some of your questions, Councilmember Young, we'll start with the MU2 and the MU3 districts. So the MU2 zone includes regulations to prevent the loss of existing commercial uses that serve neighborhoods. So it prohibits replacing commercially used buildings with exclusively residential ones, such as townhomes or apartment buildings. active ground floor uses, an applicant can increase their overall height by increasing the ground floor beyond the required 8 feet or 12 feet by code and have it offset by the overall height, meaning they can add the increased height to their building height. So if they increase beyond the 8 feet, they can add that on top of their building. Next slide, please. Okay. So staff did modify the land use tables to be applicable to the intensity of the proposed district. I'm going to briefly discuss the changes to each land use table in relation to each MU district. So the MU2 allows for lower intensity types of commercial and mixed use land use types. These are generally similar to the existing districts being consolidated, except for the introduction of new residential land use types. MU3 is slightly more moderate in intensity types of commercial and mixed use, and also does allow for those new residential uses. Again, as mentioned earlier, MU2 and 3 limits the replacement of commercial uses with residential development. MU3 allows moderate intensity types of commercial uses, and this is one of the only proposed districts that will allow several drive-through uses as a conditional use. It's a more vehicle-oriented type of district. MU6 is a moderate intensity. It's very similar to MU5, except for the allowance of the conditional use for drive-throughs. MU8, more intense types of commercial uses and introduces the allowance of some limited warehouses. And MU11, this was the most challenging land use table to put together. It does not allow the majority of the impactful land uses identified in the general commercial district. And it generally focuses on promoting higher intensity commercial and mixed use land use types. Additional updates were done to the definition chapter to clean up land use tables or land uses, modifying existing definitions, and to delete unnecessary and repetitive land uses. Yes.
Go ahead. Wait, Councilmember Dugan?
Yes, yeah, please. Thank you. Back on the drive-throughs, a couple of years ago, we prohibited new drive-throughs. And how does this, that still overrides this, right? This would only be currently lots that already have a drive-through.
So a couple years ago, new drive-throughs were prohibited in the Sugar House Central Business District. The MU5 is not mapped in Sugar House.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. Okay. The consolidation project does include an update to off-street parking requirements. The number of parking spaces required for a property will depend on its specific use and the parking context, which is determined by the zoning district the property is located in. The context for the districts proposed to merge into MU2 and 3 will remain as neighborhood center. The context for MU5, 6, 8, and 11 will depend on the property's distance to a fixed rail station. Developments more than 3/4 of a mile from a rail station will use the general context. Properties between 1/2 mile to 3/4 mile will use the neighborhood center context, and properties 1/2 mile to 1/4 of a mile will use the urban center context, and within 1/4 mile, the transit context. This approach takes into account the diverse parking needs across different areas of the city, recognizing that some areas are well served by transit while others are not. By tailoring parking requirements to transit proximity, this proposal prevents excessive parking near transit stops and ensures adequate parking in areas lacking transit access. Regarding the sign chapter, we made updates to definitions, removal of tables associated with districts being consolidated, as well as the addition of one new sign type called a pylon sign. Next slide, please.
Can I jump in on the parking piece real quick? Oh, are you addressing that on that next one?
No.
No, okay.
Go ahead.
So I just want a couple of clarifications here, because I'll be honest, I have residents on every side of this spectrum, from those who are like, there should be no parking like requirements ever because, you know, we have concerns about air quality, to the other side of it where people who live near what could be developed buildings, but in single family neighborhoods are like, if there's no parking, those people are going to park in front of my house. And like that there's that tension between the two. So just for my clarity, this is what's required in terms of the city aspects, but it does not prevent any development from saying we would like to incorporate like more additional parking. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. So our current parking chapter allows, there's no minimum or maximum for structured parking. So if somebody wants to integrate a structure associated with their development, we wouldn't cap the number of parking spaces.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. So due to the consolidation of the Sugar House Business District, the design review trigger will change from 30 feet to 85 feet. This will decrease the number of design review applications reviewed by the Planning Commission. And then a big change will be the consolidation of the TSA districts, and the point system will be deleted, and development will be primarily by right unless a proposal is over height or is seeking some sort of zoning modification. Next slide, please. Okay. The consolidation does include deleting 4 existing overlay zones. These include the South State Street corridor overlay, the downtown Main Street core overlay, the light manufacturing height overlay, and the current version of the transmittal or the transitional overlay will be replaced. I will discuss the amendments to the transitional overlay later in this presentation. Next slide, please. The map amendment portion of this proposal does include rezoning several properties from M1 to MU6. The general location of these properties is between 800 South and 1900 South, between 6 West and 1000 West, and includes property along Redwood Road between 500 South and Indiana Avenue. This is a significant zoning change because M1 allows for commercial to light industrial development, but does not allow for residential. These properties are all located within the West Side Plan area, and the West Side Plan area includes policies that support transitioning these properties away from industrial type uses to lower intensity, like housing and commercial uses like retail. All M1 properties that are being amended will become MU6 to be consistent with the development allowance in M1. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, this overlay is being modified to address concerns that staff encountered through the public engagement process. This overlay addresses the drastic change in land use and development allowance for properties currently zoned CG, as well as the M1 properties included in this proposal. The overlay will allow additional uses, which were a selection of more intensive commercial side yards are increased through adding vegetation, increased tree coverage, and increased plant variety. Next slide, please. Okay. This proposal will rezone several properties along 5600 West, extending from I-80 to SR201, from CG to M1. The Northwest Quadrant Plan Future Land map shows the 5600 West corridor as light industrial And the M1 zoning district is consistent with that designation on the future land use map. The area is primarily within the airport flight path overlay zone B, which prohibits residential land use and as a result, mixed use development. We are completely striking the general commercial district from our code and the map, so the properties need to be rezoned to another district. Most of these properties are already developed for warehouse or other uses allowed in M1, and rezoning to M1 will accommodate all existing uses and align with the zoning with the surrounding M1.
Next slide, please. All right, so since the Planning Commission recommendation, we realized there were some mapping errors that we're asking the council to fix and clean up at this point. So the first, we realized there were some residential office zone properties in East Downtown that actually allow up to 90-foot tall development that were instead moved to the 60-foot tall zone. So we're requesting that those be changed over to the 90-foot zone MU8. There's also a handful of RO properties between those 90-foot properties that we're also asking to bump up to 90 feet, just so that there's a consistent height along a block face. And then there in FBUN2 in Central 9th, we currently have an allowance for additional height next to block corners, but that additional height follows property lines and it ends up with a kind of a haphazard pattern of additional height. So we are proposing to make that a standard 165 feet from a corner. You're allowed to go up to 65 feet, so it more represents the more square forms in the yellow hatching on the map.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Romano.
On that FBUN2 area thing, so those specific corners will be called out in the text? Or will it be any corner of arterial streets or whatever?
So for this case, we would just be mapping the MU6 165 feet from the block corner, and then the MU5 would cover the rest of the block.
Oh, okay, got it. But then would it be, what about parcels that, like, I think that one on 8 South and 200 West is one big parcel. So will we be split zoning that parcel, or will that have to continue to the whole length of that parcel?
I'm trying to think. There is a property there that was recently rezoned by the council that we're not proposing to touch just because it was done in the past couple of years. I'm sorry, the directionals are covered.
Maybe I asked the wrong question. Let me ask it this way. When the 165-foot corner doesn't match the proper parcel lines, does it all go to MU6 or does it stay MU5? How do we deal with that? Or so do something where within 165 feet of the corner on this parcel you can go up higher, and then you just have to step down within the same building?
Yeah, so you'd end up with a split zone situation where part of your property could be up to 65 feet, and then perhaps the back half only can go up to 50 feet.
Okay, but we'll clarify in the ordinance that doesn't mean you have to go get it rezoned or anything. You can still build. It's just this section of your parcels can be taller.
Yeah. And we have this situation in a number of places, and there's some existing code that essentially says you treat that section with MU6 and you treat the other half as MU5.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right, next slide. So the other situation is at 21st South and 700 East. So this is a shopping center that currently half of it is zone FBUN1, which is a low-scale residential zone that essentially makes that all of those commercial uses non-conforming. We did initially propose to change that over to MU6 to match the rest of the shopping center. But based on direction from the commission to not do wholesale rezones, instead go straight across from one zone to a similar zone, we are proposing to just leave that as FBUN1 and let the property owner come in at a later time to rezone that property. It was a relatively recent downzoning decision by the council about 10 years ago. And then there's also a federal property that we originally proposed to move PL to an MU5 zone, but again, based on commission direction to just move zones straight across, we're proposing to just leave that out altogether. If that property is ever sold by the federal government, it could be coming for a rezone.
Would that require it going through that long 6-month? Is public lands different from open space?
This one wouldn't be.
Okay. So it's on a rapid transit. We've got the golf course there. We've got Riverside Park. We've got a lot of green space around there. We're not at a deficit, but it's one of the places where we need affordable housing. And so I wouldn't want to see something on a rapid transit bus line that we're subsidizing not go for a better and higher use. So currently it's owned by the federal government, and there's no intention to sell it.
We haven't heard anything of
Okay.
that's going away.
All right, next slide, please. And I promise we're almost done. Just a couple more slides. Okay, so Daniel covered the map changes, but since this was voted on by the Planning Commission or recommended, there have been several small, just minor changes made, like typos corrected, but there are a few more substantive changes that I wanted to go over with you. These have not been reflected in the ordinance because we wanted to run them by the council before we made those changes. I'll be quick on these, but the first one is to add the use contractor's yard and office indoor to the transitional overlay. This is similar to other proposals that are allowed in the overlay, such as warehouse, and it was unintentionally left out. The second is to remove Richard Street, which is in the ballpark area west of Main Street. Remove that as an area requiring enhanced active ground floor use that requires retail or restaurants. And this was, after further analysis, we don't believe that this meets the criteria and we could support that level of activity. So we're recommending that that is removed from that enhanced ground floor use category. The third is signs. Adjust the height for private directional signs for all of the sign tables to 8 feet from the current height of 4 feet, because this is leading to signs that aren't at eye level. The fourth, which we might be coming back to you with some recommendations, but is add a transition period to the adoption. Staff heard from several or a handful of developers that are well into their design phase but haven't yet applied for permits, that are asking for a transitional or a delayed implementation of this proposal. Our transmittal had 9 to 12 month recommendation. In hindsight, that was too long and would create too many conflicts with staff and additional workload to manage two codes. So the slide has 3 to 6 months, but there could be other options, and I think we would prefer to come back to you with a few different ideas that you could review for how to do that implementation. And then next slide, please. And then there's 2 more that we're recommending changes for. The first one is delete the requirement for a 6-foot walkway between multiple buildings that are over 75 feet in facade length. This requirement is in the design standards in Chapter 21A37. There is already a requirement for 15-foot break between the buildings, and requiring a 6-foot walkway that might lead to nowhere probably isn't functional, so we're recommending removing that 6-foot walkway requirement. And then the next one.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Oh yeah,
Councilmember Morrow.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. My questions were on the previous slide, so maybe
sorry.
we let them finish this slide and I
Okay.
can go back to it.
I will hurry through and then we'll go back. And then the final change is add a prohibition on mature coverage counting towards the required park strip vegetation in the M8 and MU11. So the downtown zone ordinance updates in 2023 required the ground level vegetation in park strips, excluding tree canopies, from meeting the minimum vegetation requirements. This aimed to assure a mix of greenery at both the ground level and canopy levels. In 2024, the landscaping ordinance reversed this by allowing tree canopies to count towards vegetation requirements to prioritize water conservation. The current draft code keeps the downtown and gateway zone exception requiring ground level vegetation, but in all other MU zones, it allows the tree canopies to count towards the vegetation requirements. However, based on further analysis, we are now proposing extending this requirement to the high intensity mixed use zones, the MU8 and the MU11, where narrower park strips make taller vegetation and vegetation on the ground essential for pedestrian comfort and separation from traffic. Okay, we did it. We made it through.
Wait, can I just ask for a clarification? So, I'm sorry. I'm trying to follow, but I got a little lost. So on the park strip vegetation piece for the MU8 and the 11, we're saying no tree canopy is recommended to count? Like, sorry.
Yeah, so the way the code is written is that the canopy can count towards that 33% vegetation requirement. And we are recommending that at least in the MU8 and the MU11, it doesn't count, so that we also have vegetation on the ground to provide that separation and pedestrian comfort.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Petro.
Can I ask a procedural question? So as we're going through this consolidation, when something is going to be consolidated to one of these new zones and changed from a previous one, are we as a city noticing that and doing hearings? I've gotten a lot of questions about the Lucky's grocery store in my district at 700 North and Redwood. And I haven't been able to answer if someone is trying to buy that and rezone it, or if it's us doing our work to conform to the new zone.
I missed the first part, sorry.
So we did a lot of notices to the property owners. Is that what you were asking, if they got a notice for? Yeah, we sent out multiple notices to property owners that told them the website to go to, and then they could schedule a time with us, discuss the zoning changes. So we met with a lot of property owners. I'm not sure that we heard from Lucky's themselves, but we'd be happy to sit down with them.
No, it's the property owners around them.
Oh, okay, okay. And we also notified the surrounding, at least out 300 feet from the limits of those zones, so the neighbors actually knew what was going on with the commercial zones.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then there was the real estate association mailer that went out citywide, and I think there was some confusion caused by that because people that hadn't received a previous notice because they're not in the project area received that notice. So there might be some confusion, but we're happy to answer any questions from your constituents.
Great. Okay, I have a couple items. I'm going to try and go quickly. So as a part of that, one of the items that's in the staff report, which is probably the easiest to operate around, sorry, I'm dragging up, is on item 2 under policy questions. There's the conversation related to drive-throughs and potentially requesting council to consider supporting allowing for financial institutions to have drive-throughs in the MU11 zone. So one of the things that I've seen as part of this conversation leading up to today is that we do have some of those like older businesses that are looking to like revamp, refresh, you know, and kind of move that direction. And as they're looking to do that in some of these central business district areas, because of the age of the building, it's hard for them to maintain the facade requirements and be able to build up to increase the housing opportunities that we want to see in these areas. So I guess that's a request I have, maybe, I don't know how this works, for others to like weigh in on in terms of the opportunity to modify the land use table to allow for financial institutions to have drive-throughs to be maintained in the MU11 zone. That's one. Do you want me to keep going?
I do. Yeah,
I have more. Okay.
I'm all out.
Next up, my second item is a little more probably nuanced, and maybe it's just one where I just need some education. I'm trying to figure out the how and the why associated with as we move from a townhome or a row home that might be like 30 to 40 feet versus then we shift to the multi residential, and then we're requiring commercial on the bottom, just trying to understand how those pieces meet together. I've seen some new designs where we have like a building that may have 2 units in it, but it's not a traditional townhome in the fact that it doesn't have like a delineating wall. It's kind of interwoven throughout. It's a pretty similar concept though, you know, as to that, and yet they would be required to have commercial on the bottom, which would change the typology of that. And I guess my question is twofold. So again, I probably just need some follow-up with you guys to understand those differences, not coming from a building background. But the second piece being that if we're building lower level resident structures and requiring that commercial activation piece, does that limit some of the opportunity and typology for some of the development outside of the higher level high rises?
I can jump in.
Jump in.
I'm processing. I might not have done a great job on that enhanced active ground floor slide, but there are really 2 kind of tracks in this proposal. So active ground floor uses are just required, and that is any allowed use in the district outside of parking and storage. So for say like a sideways row home or just townhomes that front the street, outside of those designated intersections and corridors that I discussed would require an active ground floor use, meaning a residential use. So that whole residential unit could count as an active ground floor use. Or, you know, if somebody wanted to be creative, an art studio or an office and then units above, however they wanted to do it. Now, for instance, if a property is located in an area designated for an enhanced active ground floor use, those intersection and corridors I described in that slide, that is a use specific to like retail, some sort of commercial component, restaurants, bars, a civic use, theaters. We have a list, but we do allow the planning commission or the planning director to make some calls on similar uses. So those are kind of the differences that you'll see. So, which is why we've identified Richards in the ballpark area as not being an appropriate street for an enhanced active ground floor use, right? You don't have the foot traffic in that area to support that.
Okay. And then similar to like our existing code and kind of land use, would there still be a process by which, let's say there's like this one unique property that has like its own thing, you know, and that as a part of that, they want to pursue potentially, you know, like a variance related to that, would they still have that opportunity to be able to go through our normal processes for a unique need?
It wouldn't be a variance. There would additionally also be 2 tracks. It depends on what they're requesting a modification of. It could be a design review or it could be a plan development.
Awesome. Okay, my last item, sorry, I will, and then I'll be done, is related to, it's not going to shock our planning staff, MU11. So MU11 has a specific call out related to additional height within the area bounded by 400 south to West Temple ramp to 300 west to I-15. Can you just help explain kind of our why behind that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking. That was part of the downtown Heights project. The name is escaping me, probably from trauma. No, it's okay. The Downtown Heights project, where we identified the greenery area, which was part of the downtown plan, to have like a boost in height associated with the general commercial district. So that's why there's that geographic carve out for greenery, and general commercial everywhere else in the city has a lower height threshold. And so similar geographic call outs could be accomplished for MU11 and other areas of the city.
Okay, so I'm going to throw District 7 on the table for that. As it relates to some of the recent follow-up conversations that have happened in the Planning Commission as they've been considering individual projects that are coming through. I think that I would love to see that type of an opportunity for south of 2100 South as bounded by 13th East and McClelland all the way over to the freeway. And that opportunity for additional height in that area. We know that there's new development that's coming. We also know the residents don't want a canyon. And so in terms of being able to create additional height to also allow for lower height and more of a mixed use within that already commercialized area, that is something that I would love to see included as part of our efforts moving forward. I do think it benefits the economic opportunity zone to create more housing in that space, and I think that this would be a great way to signal as a city that we want to see more residents in that area.
Just a follow-up to the height in this area would match that of Granary up to 150. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Romano.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm supportive of what Councilmember Young just said about Sugar House. I think that's appropriate. Let me back up. This is really great work, planning staff. Thank you for all your hard work on this. One thought as I was looking through the maps is, and I don't think we can accomplish it in this ordinance, but I think that overall, looking at the map of our city, it would be nice if there were more MU2 and MU3 pockets within neighborhoods. So I don't know if that's something that maybe we can accomplish when we look at potential changes to the R1 zones of mapping MU2 and 3 within some of those neighborhood corners. I can think of several places like in Liberty Wells where we have, like, for instance, where Alchemy Coffee is, we have just, a few spots, but I would like more places like that in our city where somebody living in a residential neighborhood could walk to a neighborhood shop. So I would like us to look at, again, I think it probably has to happen in a different ordinance because we'd be looking at not parcels that were noticed for this ordinance, but changing some of the R1 zones on significant corners to MU2 and 3. On the Richard Street question, I think Richard Street south of 13th South makes sense that it couldn't require enhanced ground floor uses, but I'm wondering if we want to reconsider Richard Street north of 13th South. Seems like that might be more amenable to that, and that's part of the Ballpark Next area as well, and it just seems like there's that. It's just a question that I'd like to consider. I thought that Green Street map was a little confusing to me, that just the building of that would have been downzoned to FBU11, so I'd love some history on why that happened and why the council did that when they did that, because it doesn't make sense to me that just the building of a strip mall and not the parking lot would be zoned as one thing and not the other. And so I know that this goes against what the Planning Commission says, but I'd like to know a little bit more about that, and maybe we should rectify that at this time. I think I'm wondering, there's a few spots in my district that I think I would like to consider a couple map changes. Some parcels along State Street, I think, could go up to MU8 instead of MU5 or 6. And then I think also some parcels in the ballpark that are slated for MU5 might be more appropriate for MU2 or 3. I'm thinking of like Coatesville Avenue or some of those where they are commercial corridor right now, but are really single family houses. And I'm wondering if I would like to look at some of those parcels. And so I think that's probably an offline conversation I should have with planning staff at some point. But I think there's sort of between Main and State some parcels that I'd like to downzone, and right along State some parcels that I might want to upzone a little bit as we're doing this. And then my big question, which I can also take offline, is as I'm looking through the tables, it seems to me like there's some places where we could create even more consistency throughout all of these MU zones. For instance, one easy one is open space. We're requiring 10% in some areas, except for MU8 requiring 20%, and then MU11 we're back down to 10%. Why not just 10% across the board? The rear yard setback is a little strange to me. 20 feet in MU2, and then it goes down to 10, and then it goes to 10 except for 20 when it's abutting certain things. And there's probably reasons why that all makes sense. And so if I could just schedule a time to go through some of those things, and if there's opportunity for more consistency and more simplicity. So like as an architect going through designing a building in these zones, I just know the rear yard's always 20 feet or the rear yard's always 10 feet. That would help me rather than having to look at this table every single time. But there's probably I'm sure some of those have very valid reasons why you did that. So I just need an explanation for that.
Okay.
Councilmember Pui. So, sorry, did you want to respond to any of that?
We're happy to meet offline to discuss all those questions for sure.
Great, that's what I thought you'd say. Councilmember Pui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is very directed about TSA zones and the point system. I would like to also schedule a little meeting to understand a little bit about the impacts of by right approval on TSA zones. I know there's a lot of concerns in my part of town about TSA, and some good and some bad that have happened with the development of TSA in the area and the impact on the neighbors. But let me cite one that I'm curious about. There is a property on 900 West and corner with 200 North. There is a large apartment complex, and because of this, again, I'm like not an expert on any of this, but my understanding is because of the size and the location of the building, pretty much the whole side of parking on 200 North was removed, the street parking. Because of fire lane concerns. So not only the building doesn't have any parking units, as TSA zone allows, but now we have removed all of the parking spaces from the side of the block side, the block face, and it's a very large building. So I will say that it's probably 3/4 of the block now doesn't have any parking. And that seemed like poking the neighbors on the eye a little even more. And I bet that was not in the original intent. So I really want to make sure that the fire code and the rules the fire department needs are addressed when we're making these changes, because that seemed contraproducent to the overall goal. There is already a street and parking was there, so losing those spots seemed strange to me. So I guess one of the overarching question will be to me, what other impacts happen on the street side, and if that could be addressed when we're making these changes.
I'll try to answer that as best as possible. We do work with fire as closely as possible when we develop these codes. And then when development projects come in, we route to fire always. It is challenging when on-street parking is removed to meet fire access, and planning often doesn't have a say or a role in that. We have been discussing kind of internally about maybe some policies to try to work on when that would be appropriate to remove on-street parking for fire access, and whether or not, an applicant should really relocate some of that parking because it is impacting the public at the end of the day. That's to come. But outside of, working really closely with fire, it is challenging to anticipate when that's going to happen on some of these smaller streets. I think we've seen it like on Emerald in Chicago, 200 North, and then also in the Central 9th area.
That's very interesting to me because I don't understand the process, so I would love to learn a little more about how that process works between the approval and the permits and the fire department's feedback. But to me, this is 200 North is not a very small street. I will say that the parking strip is probably 25 feet wide, and the street is a very large, typical Salt Lake street. So to me, it makes sense that maybe trigger some street redesign or something like that to address the concerns and make that area a little more walkable even, but maybe relocating some of the parking spots. So I know that I'm, this could be spinning into something more complicated, but TSA is a major part of my district and District 1, and I want to make sure that we are addressing some of the concerns. If we see more apartments like that one, which I think we may, that means that we're going to lose the parking that we have and some of the neighbors rely, and then adding probably thousands of units into those neighborhoods that without any parking units in many of them. So I just want to make sure that there is some acknowledgement on that.
We would love to have a follow-up conversation with you or other interested council members about kind of the process that happens with development review and then fire and transportation's involvement. It's not TSA specifically, it's buildings over 30 feet trigger aerial apparatus requirements. And so basically MU3 and above, there has to be adequate fire access.
And if it's okay if I jump in on, this might be getting too into the weeds, but one thing this proposal is doing that might help some of these instances is that there are some front and corner side yard exceptions. So like on the 200 North project where there is that large park strip, the MU code has an exception where if there is a 30-foot setback from basically a 30-foot setback to the property line from the street, they would be exempt and wouldn't have to do that front yard setback, because the fire also comes into play with the distance from the street and how that aerial apparatus equipment can reach the building. We can provide more information on that, but we are attempting to address some of these problems through that as well.
I just wanted to add that I also have some questions about the TSA and parking that Councilmember Pui raised, so I'd like to be a part of that meeting too. Anything else? All right. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Oh yeah, great job. That was a lot of work. And yeah, I think it was Councilmember Mono who pointed out like what a huge undertaking this was. And yeah, we're really glad that that you were able to get so much feedback already. So thank you so much. Way to go.
If it's okay, there's some of the outstanding straw polls that maybe at a future briefing we could bring back relatively quickly if the council would like to. After we have some of the meetings to discuss with council members on the various questions about parking or some of the parcels and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Not today. Yeah, okay. All right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councilmember Mono.
can we just work with Nick Tarbett then to figure out when we have follow-up questions, how to get those things scheduled? Because I assume we wanted to.
Yeah, well, Councilmember Mono, we can work on setting up some small group meetings as quickly as possible.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to item number 3, which is an ordinance for an alley vacation near 300 West and Paxton Avenue. At the table, we have Brian Fulmer, Council Policy Analyst, and Olivia Checo. Did I get it? Specco, okay, sorry. Principal Planner. Okay.
This is a proposal to vacate an L-shaped alley that's owned by the city, and it begins at approximately 268 West Paxton Avenue, which is about 1170 South. It's in Council District 5. If vacated, the alley property would be sold to the abutting property owners at market. And the applicant is with us and would appreciate an opportunity to briefly address the council and then is available for questions. I'll turn it over to Olivia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Like mentioned, I'm Olivia Svetko, a principal planner. I'm going to be presenting to you an alley vacation near 300 West and Paxton Avenue. Next slide, please. The request is to vacate this L-shaped alley highlighted on the screen in yellow. The north-south portion has not been in use for many years. Typically, the access to these properties that are adjacent to the alley has been off of 300 West. It kind of follows that path outlined in the proposed access easement, also on the screen. And if you'll go to the next slide for me. Okay, so a little bit of background and existing conditions on the ground here. This alley was platted in 1890 and originally continued further east off of the screen until that eastern portion was vacated in 1960. The properties surrounding this alley are all zoned for general commercial and typically function that way with the exception of one single-family dwelling. It is that more narrow parcel highlighted in gold. There's two parcels there. The red dashed area, the north-south portion of this alley, has been gated off since about 2020. The owners had stated that they gated that off in an effort to reduce rising crime in the area, people camping and doing illegal activities on this alley back behind these properties. Since the fence has been gated off, and prior to that, these properties along the alley have been accessed through 300 West. You'll see most of these properties have access either from 300 West or directly from Paxton Avenue. The two properties that are outlined in that dashed gold are accessed via the alley. They currently access their properties coming from 300 West, following through the alley to their property, following the path of the proposed easement. Next slide. Okay, so there are several factors for approval that Planning Commission and City Council should consider when vacating an alley. One of them is that the petition satisfies at least one of the following policy considerations. This petition actually satisfies two. My apologies, D should be a red X. But B and C, public safety. The alley was substantially contributing to crime and unlawful activities. So that's something that this petition meets. Closing that, and this also meets C because the alley does not serve as a positive design element. Next slide. Additional consideration factors. One of those consideration factors is that the petition meets one of those previously stated policies. Others include that closing the alley will not deny any property access and will not result in any property being landlocked. With the easement in place, this petition meets that. The only standard or factor for approval that this petition doesn't meet is the requirement that all relevant city departments have no reasonable objection, which I will address on the next slide, please. Okay, so in 2023, Transportation had initially commented on this proposal. Initially, the proposal was only to vacate the north-south leg of this alley. The petition has since been amended to vacate the entire alley in favor of the easement. Transportation does not support the proposed alley vacation, stating that the proposed easement is not a suitable substitute for a public alley. Next slide. This last September 25th, the Planning Commission unanimously voted to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the proposed alley vacation. And I believe that is my final slide for you guys.
Yes, Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you very much. On the access guaranteed, what does that mean? Because if I'm a property owner, 6 and 7 are two separate lots, so they could be sold separately, and property 8 and 9. If there's an easement there, is that access mean by foot, car? How does if property owner 4 and 5 decide to build a fence around there, it's an easement, they can still access, people can walk through there, but they can't drive through there. What's the definition of that guaranteed access? And how does that work?
The access easement protects access to all of those abutting properties by vehicle.
By vehicle, okay. That was my question. Okay, thank you.
Chair, I just want to clarify, thank you. By vacating it, it wouldn't change the use ever. It would still continue to be that alleyway.
That is my understanding, yes. And I also wanted to mention, I think we did earlier, but the applicant is here as well.
Are there any future plans for the applicant to change use or to, I'm looking at these different properties, but there's certainly a future where they could be purchased and consolidated.
Certainly. There's not currently a plan that we've seen for these properties. You're fine. The proposal is just to close the alley.
It would be challenging to change the use or to build over that if there's an access easement recorded on property. So.
Oh, all right. If then we'll go ahead and give the applicant a few minutes. 5 minutes, right? Yeah. So you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I won't take that long.
Oh, here, you'll want to click your
Oh,
button.
I don't know.
You never let a lawyer promise that they're not going to take a lot of time, right? So I'm Ryan Merriman. I represent the applicant, and what we have here is a pretty practical solution that all the property owners have agreed to address some problems that they've had over the years. And I just want to emphasize that the access easement that we have in place will benefit all of the owners along the access easement. So once this is approved and recorded, every owner along there will have a deeded access right that runs with the property. So if the property switches hands, the new owner will have access right and be able to continue to access the property. There's only one owner, Mr. James Yeats, that uses that alley to access. He's the one that owns the single family home. And so it was important to us, of course, to get his approval and sign off, and as indicated in the petition, he has agreed to that. And so with him maintaining that access, all the other owners are excited to get this vacated so that they can control that area and make sure that they don't have any of the problems that they've experienced historically. So I thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I just encourage you to help these property owners address these problems in a way that they've all agreed to, and they've really come together well to fix some of these issues they've been dealing with.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Lopez Chavez.
Hey, thank you for that. Could you speak to some of those problems? My mechanic's actually at the end of the street close by, so I was curious.
My client has owned his parcel since the 80s, and over the years, there's been some urban camping along the alleyway. There's been some crime. There have been, in the last few years, a couple of fires, just because a lot of stuff kind of accumulates when you have that sort of. And so with the crime, there have been theft at some of these businesses. Some of the businesses in the area have vehicles and stuff out, and so when you have urban camping in the alleyway, and you have vehicles and stuff that are out that are being kept as part of the businesses, there's just more public safety concerns in protecting property. So those have been issues that have lasted a long time. Putting the gates on there helped. But if the alleyway is not vacated, legally they can't have the gates up, right? Because you can't obstruct the alleyway. And so that's one of the reasons why we need the alley vacated, so that they can control that area and make sure that we don't have those problems crop up again. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Mono.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, it's still going to be an alleyway, but the reason we're vacating it is because the property owners would like to put a gate on either end that anyone abutting the properties would have a key to the gate, or I'm just trying to work out how this is going to improve the condition.
Right, and the gate will not block off access to the alley. If you remember that map that had the red dashed area on the north-south portion of the alley, that is the portion that is gated off currently, as well as a gate just past the single family, blocking off those last properties out to the east that do not use the access. So the area covered by the access easement will not be gated off. It will still function as an alley, just without that north-south leg.
And I guess if I could speak a little bit more to that, Councilman, when they have the private access easement, it's now their area, right? And the law prohibits them from obstructing access through the easement. It allows them to control the area, so they could give everyone that has access a key to access it through a gate. But what they can't do is put anything up that would obstruct any owner from access through the easement. So if they put up a gate but someone didn't have a key to that, that would obstruct the access and they wouldn't be legally allowed to do that.
And I guess my question, maybe I wasn't clear, is I'm not sure how, I'm still not connecting how us vacating it makes it more safe than what it is right now. Is it like a trespassing thing where you can legally ask people to move where you currently can't, or I just don't understand the difference. That if we're not actually closing access, how we're making it safer.
Yes, so it would, once it becomes a private easement that the owners own, so they own the underlying ground and they've got an easement for people to come and go to access those businesses, they can control the access. And they can make sure, like when their businesses are closed, they can have gates up so that people can't come in there, right? They can control who comes and goes as long as it's available for access to and from the properties, like during business hours and for having, business visitors and things like that come there. They can allow that, and then they can also restrict it. If it's a public alley, you can't put a gate on there. You can't have any obstructions. You can't control who comes in and out. It has to be open all the time. And that's what led to the issues that they'd experienced before. Does that answer your question?
And, I think another, a little bit of background that may help clarify why we are where we are today on this. The initial petition was only to vacate that north-south leg of the alley, and that is the portion that is gated off, and that's not allowed by, public alley standards. So the initial petition was to close that portion and leave that remaining east-west portion for the property owners that use that to access their property. Thank you. Yes, so now you can see it up here. So by doing that, as you can see on the screen, that leaves a landlocked alley with no legally protected access. The commission initially heard this petition and said, come back with an easement proposed to protect that access, and that's what the applicant did. They came back with that easement in place and 100% of the abutting property owner signatures. So initially, this petition was intended to solve the gate issue on that north-south portion, but by doing this, by vacating the entire alley and replacing it with the easement, we are solving the problem and protecting the access to these properties highlighted in gold.
So we're now, the current proposal is to vacate the entire L-shaped section.
That's correct.
Okay, and are there any Rocky Mountain Power infrastructure running through that need to be considered?
No, I don't believe so.
Can you talk a little bit more? Maybe you answered this in your last answer, but about transportation's objections and whether what the planning commission asked, did that ease their concerns at all, or?
Transportation had initially stated that they did not believe an access easement would be a sufficient replacement to a public alley. This was because the request didn't really change. There was just an easement proposed on top of it with the proposal. This was not rerouted to transportation. So it was, they just stated that they did not believe it was sufficient.
And to be fair to them, I think that when we were before the planning commission initially, there was a lot of concern when we're just vacating the vertical portion of it, that, okay, people are coming across the parking lot to use the rest of that alleyway, but there's no guarantee of access to get there. It's just sort of this floating easement. And so I think, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I'm surmising that's why transportation didn't like it and why we modified it.
Okay. I mean, I would think that that makes a pretty big difference in terms of satisfying their concerns. So, but.
You know, Mr. Chair, I'd like to know if transportation is okay with this change proposal, if that alleviates that. And then you probably already said this in your presentation, but does this get sold then at fair market value to all of the properties?
Yes.
On the south side of the alleyway, or is it going to be split in half and part of it's going to go to the property on the north side?
I believe it is to those properties to the south, unless Kelsey's got a better answer.
It's based on district, and so it could be split depending on the interest, but they would have to purchase it at fair market value.
And given that there's so many properties.
Okay. So it seems like the north property is in a different subdivision, so it would be primarily purchased by the southern properties at fair market value. And your earlier statement about transportation, we can follow up with Jenna Carver in transportation and get a new review comment from her about this proposal.
Thanks, Kelsey. And just a procedural question. What happens if, like, we approve this, it goes forward, and then one of the property owners doesn't pay for their section of the alleyway? Do we then own this one little random piece of someone's backyard? What happens then? Or do they all have to actually agree and actually pay for the fair market value of it before any of it gets transferred?
I can follow up with you on that question.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Pui.
Very briefly, I want to make sure that if I understand this correctly and I remember this correctly, and there are high chances that I don't, the new tracks line is basically right of this photo, right on that angle. I just want to make sure that there is no concerns with that future project, ensuring that there is that is being thought about in case there is a need for access or any other infrastructure needed when we are when the state is moving on the tracks extension. So is that, I just want to make sure that that's acknowledged somewhere.
Yes, that may be something we have to follow up with you on as well. I don't believe we were aware of those when this was initially submitted in 2022. That's certainly something we can take a look at.
Wait a minute. Wouldn't the tracks line be, can you help orient me? Would it really be over on the, is it? Okay. I don't know why I'm not visualizing it, but okay.
I had to also Google to see the bigger area to orient myself. But yes, if apparently that little angle on the side of that photo that you see right now, that's where the line will go through. I I just want to make sure that I personally don't feel confident I get some of those answers addressed, just because that project is obviously very big, and I'm not sure that there is any concern yet, but I want to make sure that there isn't before we go ahead with something like this.
Yeah, of course, we can follow up with some additional information on that line. Catherine Pasker did just inform me about the procedurally, if somebody doesn't want to purchase their portion of the alley or agree or sign the easement, we will not vacate that alley. So it is a condition of the ordinance. So it would just be dead in the water.
Well, is there time to check on this between when we would normally vote anyway? If we put this on an agenda, on a future agenda, which would probably be on the March 18th.
Check on transportation and then the track sign?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are there any objections with tentatively putting it on the agenda for that time? And okay. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other head shakes, so okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to item number 4. This is an ordinance for Economic Development Loan Fund loan to Himalayan Kitchen. And joining us for this, we have Austin Kimmel from City Council staff, Roberta Reichel from Business Development, and William Wright from Economic Development.
Great, thanks, council members. This is an Economic Development Loan Fund, or EDLF loan to Himalayan Kitchen and restaurants specializing in Indian and Nepali food. The Loan Fund Committee recommends the council approve a $350,000 loan at a 10.5% interest rate over 7 years. The loan would help create 15 new jobs in the next year and retain 5 existing ones. It would also help pay for tenant improvements, machinery and equipment, and working capital. This item does not require a public hearing, and a vote is scheduled tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to Economic Development.
Thank you, Austin. Good to be with you, council members. This is a loan, as you guys know, a staple in downtown Salt Lake City. Himalayan Kitchen is looking to grow over to the engine block. We're really excited about this development. You've seen loans in the past for this same development that we're going to see fully activated, full of local businesses. So we're excited about this loan, and I'll pass it over to Will if he has anything else to add.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to thank you for taking time to consider the loan application for Himalayan Kitchen and recommend reading the write-up of Utah Stories of the business owner and the business, Soraya Bastakati, and Himalayan Kitchen in the December issue of Utah Stories. Really incredible story. We're really excited to be working with him in the business and looking forward to these businesses opening soon and revitalizing that section of the engine block on 300 West.
Great.
Hey.
Oh,
well,
go ahead.
thanks. Thanks for processing all these District 4 business applications. He's actually my neighbor too, which is excellent. And so I'm just very pleased that this family has built up their organization, their company and enterprise, and want to expand and take advantage of a strong economy and burgeoning in this new location a little further down south and downtown, an extension of downtown, and to bring these flavors into Salt Lake. So I'm super supportive, and I would love my colleagues to support too.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, we'll take any of Ava's successful businesses to District 5 any day.
To clarify, they're not leaving District 4, Darren, okay?
I think they are. The engine block is 5, isn't it? Am I wrong?
No, they're expanding. They're expanding.
Yeah, to be clear, it's an expansion, so second location.
Got it. All right. Okay. Calm down.
Perfect.
Calm
Okay.
down. There's going to be enough Himalayan
But
kitchen
it is
for
a
everybody.
district
We'll
five
take this
loan.
offline, Darren. Don't worry.
I got it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Thank you. Okay. We are now at item number 5, which is informational update on the Central Business Improvement Area and Board of Equalization. We have Austin Kimmel still, Roberta Reichelt, and Andy Feldman from Economic Development. Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Morena.
Oh, no,
I'm
you're
sorry.
fine. No, Austin, you're first.
This is just a quick update about a software error that affected the noticing during the process of reestablishing the Central Business Improvement Assessment Area, as well as the corrective steps that Economic Development is taking in response. So during the Board of Equalization meetings last month, it was discovered that a mapping error affected which properties received a notice for holiday lighting. As you'll recall, there are 2 separate assessments within the downtown area, one for economic promotion and another for holiday lighting. Not all properties pay the holiday lighting assessment, only those with the holiday lighting in front of their properties. The error resulted in several property owners not receiving a mailed notice about the holiday assessment fee, and several other property owners received a notice when they should not have. Altogether, 55 of the 107 properties that should have received a notice did not, and 134 properties incorrectly received one. So in response, Economic Development has reissued the assessment notices to the correct properties, which were sent out last week, and they've scheduled a new series of Board of Equalization meetings specifically for the holiday lighting assessment. Those will occur on February 18th, 19th, and 20th. And the department anticipates transmitting the board's final report for the 2 assessments and adoption ordinance for the council's consideration in March. And with that, I'll turn it over to Economic Development in case they have anything to add.
Yeah, thank you so much, Austin, for the summary. Good afternoon. It is wonderful to see all of you. We wanted to come before you to ensure that we have transparency in everything that we do. Of course, we met with the mayor's office. We also met with council. We also met with DTA to ensure that they knew. But also, as a follow-up, we will be meeting with Aaron Bentley and his team. They've been very receptive, and we're looking forward to ensure that in the future, we don't face something like this. And I would also say that the process actually really worked, because through the Board of Equalization process is when we discovered the discrepancy, and it was something that we needed to address. Also, our city attorney, Sarah Montoya, and our bond counsel have worked side by side with us. So with that, I think it's been a team effort, and we have a good solution. I would have Roberta and then Andy provide additional information.
We're happy to take any questions. You have the dates for the new meetings, and we'll be providing the summary after that. And like it was mentioned in the report, we may be pushing our approval process back a few weeks, but we do not anticipate any lapse in services that are provided to the downtown assessment.
Yeah, go ahead,
Thank you.
Councilmember.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Lorena and your team for always having the integrity of owning our mistakes, as well as ensuring transparency and the proper accessibility to the different changes that we might see in this. I didn't hear a single complaint about it. So I have the full and utmost respect for you and your team, and I look forward to hearing more in March. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have a good team, and I'm looking forward to work with Aaron. He's been really receptive to us talking to him. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. We are now to agenda item number 6, which is a tentative break. And we're just a little bit behind, but we can still, let's do 15 minutes. Okay, thanks. Oh, which is pulled, actually. No one's listening? No, no one's listening. Okay. Oh, that one's, yeah. We do. Yeah, okay. Okay. Now we're really going to start. We decided to pull agenda item number 7. We'll start that conversation at a later date, which is great because we're a little bit behind anyway, and it's time for our board appointment interview. So we have Alan Toalepai. Is Alan, or is it Alan? Alan? Okay. Alan, is Alan here or online? All right. Then let's wait a minute, and because that is set for 4:30. So, Cindy, will you just let us know when somebody's online? Are you? I don't know if you're. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I called you back from break like really fast, like things were starting right away, and I thought they were. So stand by. Yeah, actually. So we're going to go ahead while we're waiting and do the announcements. So, Lehua, take it away.
We have some very exciting announcements for this evening, so it's good to get to these early. The first item is we received an invitation from CAN, from Tammy, the Director of Community and Neighborhoods, for a council member to participate in the Youth and Family Strategic Plan Steering Committee. And we just wanted to confirm with the council that Councilmember Sarah Young has indicated that she would be interested in serving on that. And so we just wanted to let council members know and get any feedback if there were questions. Seeing none.
Great.
I can't think of a better council member for that.
Thank you. Second is, as a reminder for council members, towards the end of 2023, you adopted a new code of conduct section in the council policy manual, and that included a requirement for the form to be signed each year. And so just like your conflict of interest forms that we processed before in a previous meeting, attached to your announcements is that form. And if council members could just pull that off, read it, affirm your signature, and pass that over to me, I can keep track of those. And for council members Mono and Pui who are absent or online tonight, then we'll follow up with you through your liaison. Our board appointment has not arrived.
Can you think of some more announcements you'd like to make?
Yeah, but probably shouldn't.
Well, let's just talk about what, so we've got, after.
We could start budget amendment 3. There are a couple of items we could talk about.
Before we close, you mean?
We could, yeah. We could start that briefing.
Yeah.
And then it looks like Julie was not able to get an answer from Ellen, and so she can keep trying. We could start BA3 and then at some point just break.
Okay.
For our closed session.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and skip to item number 10, which is a follow-up briefing on budget amendment number 3. And for this, we've got, who do we have for this?
Jennifer.
Oh, good, got Jennifer.
I know, oh good, and Sylvia's gonna come up as well.
Great.
And then of
Thank
course,
you.
Ben, even though he's the newest member of the administrative staff, is also here in case we have questions.
Yes, thank you, Ben.
We just have a couple of new items for this one. As you know, the public hearing for Budget Amendment 3 is tonight. The first item, we just wanted to make sure that the council knew that the treatment for the diseased sycamore trees will take several years to work. So we wanted to confirm, or the council might want to confirm with the administration that they will plan on including the $150,000 in the next couple of years of the annual budget. So we can make that request officially to the administration so that it's included in the annual budget. The next item is just clarifying that one of the positions requested by IMS is less urgent than the other one. And so if the council wants to hold off on acting on one of those items, we can make that clear in the motion sheet. And then the last sort of item of new business is a request from the administration to move several positions in the mayor's office to the community and neighborhoods. This would transfer several FTEs. The amount would be about $277,000 from the mayor's office to the Department of Community and Neighborhoods. And we have listed some policy questions there about in the annual budget, you guys could choose to ask the administration for some updated metrics on that group of employees. So staff can plan on just having that question ready for the annual budget when and if it makes sense. And I think that's it. I don't think we have any other things to go over through budget amendment number 3.
Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I just want to also thank the administration for looking out for all of our trees and realizing that it is not just going to be a one-time cost for this year, but a multiple-year endeavor here to protect our urban canopy. So appreciate that very much. And just the second question is on the transfer of the personnel from the mayor's office to the CAN. That's just a straight transfer. There's really no funding change because it's just a straight transfer from one department to another department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I do think we have a few more items in budget amendment number 3, but just because of timing and some staff who needs to go, it looks like we may not be able to get the board appointment back online in time. But if we could move into closed session and then continue the public briefing items after that, that would be ideal.
Okay,
If that's
sounds good. So, do you want to make that motion now? Okay. If anybody would like to make a motion to move into closed session, I will hear it.
For the purpose of,
Advice of counsel and property.
move that we enter into closed session for advice of counsel and property.
Second.
Acquisition.
Acquisition.
I have a motion from Councilmember Petro, a second from Councilmember Lopez Chavez. We will go ahead and roll call this. Councilmember Petro? Yes. Councilmember Pui?
Yes.
Councilmember Lopez Chavez?
Aye.
Verdugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Mono?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. That is 6 in favor with Councilmember Young absent. If you are not part of this closed session briefing, if you would just please step outside so that we can.
And council members Mono and Pui, you should have a link from Keith, is that right?
Yes.
From Keith Reynolds in your email to join
A
a
link
separate link
where?
for closed session. A link in your email.
Yeah, we
from
may need
Keith
to resend
Reynolds.
the link, Lehua. I don't think I ever got a link, so I'm not sure if there was a.
Sorry, there was an email from Matthew Brown is who it should have come from this morning.
Take another look. Here we go. Thanks.
exit closed session, and then go back into closed session because we needed to also state that we were closing for deployment of security devices. So I will take a motion to,
Closed session.
Mr. Chair, I move that we exit closed session.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Dugan, a second from Councilmember Lopez Chavez. We'll go ahead and roll call it. Councilmember Petro? Yes. Councilmember, I don't think we have Councilmember Lopez Chavez?
Aye.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Councilmember Young?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. That is 5 council members with 2 of them in the waiting room. So maybe present, but not yet. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I move that we move into closed session for the discussion regarding deployment of security personnel, devices, and systems, and attorney-client matters, and property acquisition.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Dugan, a second from Councilmember Lopez Chavez. We'll go ahead and roll call this. Councilmember Petro. Yes. Councilmember Lopez Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes.
Councilmember Young.
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. That is 5 with 2 council members absent. We are now back in closed session.
here with Kate Bradshaw, the head lobbyist for the Salt Lake City team. And we are excited to give you a legislative update coming here from the Capitol on week 3. How much time do we have on the agenda? I know you guys are running a bit behind, so we can tailor this based on what you guys need.
2 minutes.
We have you down for 30 minutes. But
Okay.
Yeah, no, so we're okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Sounds great. Council members, feel free to interrupt us at any point if you guys have a comment or question on a bill that we're discussing. We're going to go through kind of a rapid fire list here, so don't feel like you need to wait until the end. With that, do you guys have any questions for us before we get started?
Nope.
No?
Go
Okay.
for it.
Great. Well, we are going to start with HB 267, Public Sector Labor Union Amendments by Representative Tusher. This bill is of high concern to the city, as it would impact over 60% of our city workforce that are represented through unions, not just our police and firefighters, but also our AFSCME represented employees that work at the airport or on public lands team or in the public utilities team or other areas within the city. This bill has been covered pretty heavily in the media and is currently circled on the third reading calendar as it has been since Friday. There's an introduced version and then 3 subs to this bill. And the union folks are still working closely with the bill sponsors to come to some agreement on some sticking points within this legislation. Salt Lake City has been working closely with our unions, and we want to stand in solidarity with our employees who want to and deserve the right to be represented by the unions. So we have been watching this very closely and waiting to see where this lands. The subs 2 and 3 would retain the ability for our unions to maintain collective bargaining, but the introduced version in sub 1 would remove that ability. And so that's of grave concern to us. Any questions for me on the union bill?
I have a quick question. So I know one of the questions that has been circulating in the community, and I've just heard different interpretations, so would love to hear yours. When they're giving a percentage requirement, is that percentage requirement for existing members, or is it for any employee who would qualify to potentially be in that union?
That's a great question, Councilmember Young. Both. One of the subs, I believe sub 2 is all of the union members, and I believe sub 3 attempts to clarify that a little bit more. Or I'm sorry, sub 2 would be anybody within that category. So anybody within fire, for example, even if you weren't union represented, would be a voting member. And then the third sub is more tailored to the specific union.
And then a non-vote is a no vote. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions from the council on this one, or else we'll move to the next bill? Okay, great. The next bill that we are working really closely is HB 355. This is Critical Infrastructure Materials Amendments by Representative Snyder. This bill was introduced last session as well, and the Utah League of Cities and Towns, in conjunction with the Utah Association of Counties and many cities that would be directly impacted by gravel pit or critical infrastructure mining, worked closely with a representative to get the bill last year moved to a study. And that study was conducted by an independent third-party contractor, Stantec, over the interim, and brought together a whole host of stakeholders, including cities, Wasatch Front Regional Council, the Utah League of Cities and Towns, the mining industry, to understand what the critical infrastructure needs are within the state and where there may be some barriers. HB 355 is somewhat of a result of the that study and the work that was done over the interim. This bill would allow for existing gravel pits to expand their operations, not just to if they were mining gravel, but let's use the example of they own a parcel next to them and they would be able to expand to that parcel. And if they started digging there and they found gold, they would be able to start mining for gold. We are really concerned about this bill because of the expansion ability and how that could impact our air quality, our watersheds, and our land use here within the city. We are working closely with our partners at the League of Cities and Towns and other entities on how we can amend this bill to make it more amenable to cities. It does allow for or require the operator of the mine to come to the city for an expansion or to put the city on notice that they would like to expand, and for the legislative body to have a public hearing regarding and a public meeting regarding the expansion. And then if there is evidence in the record that the expansion to the new land will imminently endanger the public health, safety, and welfare, then the expansion could be reconsidered. So there would be an opportunity for the legislative body to weigh in on this, but the standard is pretty high to not allow for that expansion under the current draft due to public health, safety, and welfare issues. Any comments there? Anything you want to add, Kate?
Councilmember Petro? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Who decides if their health or well-being or whatever those conditions you listed are being imperiled?
Yeah, I think the bill doesn't have doesn't specify that right now. That's one of the things that we're looking into. Councilmember Petro.
The only thing I'd add is I think this will bring together the coalition that existed last year of concerned parties. So we'll be working with some other cities and the county, probably multiple counties, in making sure that we can get this bill modified a bit.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if you could just clarify for me, this is only for existing mines where there's a mining right or an extraction right that then could be expanded, or would this also allow for new extraction sites? And then where is this in the process?
Yeah, great questions, Councilmember Mono. This would allow for expansion for an existing right. So if you own the land, say you own 4 parcels and you're only mining on 1, you could expand to those other 3. So it allows an expansion to land, but it also allows an expansion of the mineral. So if you're mining gravel on parcel 1 and you move to parcel 2 through this expansion ability and you find gold, you could then mine gravel and gold on all 4. And sorry, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to get a status of where it's at.
Yeah, where it's at is that we are working closely with our partners and the representative on potential amendments to tighten up some of this language.
And it's new in the process. It's just been out a few days. Has not had a committee hearing yet.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Have they talked about limiting the amount of gravel they can mine every year to offset some of the impacts to the air quality? Is it like, they have a maximum amount that they can gravel, or is it just 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and keep going?
Yeah, there's no language around that in the bill as it's drafted.
Okay.
Any other questions for us on this one, or I can move on?
I think we're good. Next one.
Okay, thank you. The next bill is HB 333, Highway Expansion Impacts on Signage Amendments by Representative Peterson. This is being deemed the billboard bill. As drafted, this bill would allow for the relocation of billboards for any highway widening project. So doesn't have to be I-15, it could be Bangerter, it could be 215, it could be any highway. And as currently drafted, the bill would allow for relocation of those billboards anywhere along the highway corridor. So a billboard in St. George, because there's a widening project down there, just using this as an example, could be relocated to Salt Lake under the current language in the bill. This is being worked pretty heavily by our partners as well, because there's certainly a understanding that how it's drafted maybe wasn't the intentionality behind it. So we are working with our partners on amendments to this bill and tightening that language, as this would have a pretty significant impact on Salt Lake City and the I-15 expansion project. Any questions on billboards, or Kate, anything else you want to add?
Just go ahead, Kate.
There were a lot of survey questions in yesterday's Legislative Policy Committee meeting for the League of Cities and Towns. There was some problems with the survey in the meeting. So if you check your email, there's another opportunity to take that survey again, as we were dealing with some of the negotiations with the billboard industry on that issue.
Kate, can you talk about, did the expansion has to be on the highway? It can't expand into the city. So you couldn't take one of the billboards off of, say, I-15 and move it onto 500 South. Was that,
Grand Boulevards are one of the kind of issues that's being discussed and negotiated. I would say that was probably still in flux. So maybe a different example would be, you couldn't take it from I-15 and put it on 2nd South.
Okay.
That would not work, but there's still some moving pieces, I would say, on kind of the Grand Boulevard issues, and then how far, there's some discussions about 1 mile, 1.5 miles.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions on billboards? Okay, great. I'm going to move on to land use, Councilmember Mono's favorite subject. So a couple bills here around land use. The first is SB 26, which is the Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone amendments. And this is really a kind of technical cleanup bill as currently drafted, where some of the tax increment would be changed. There'd be some changes to the median gross income requirements, and some other kind of just technical issues. As you guys know, Salt Lake City has one HTRZ, and maybe the second one has been approved. I know we are close to getting approval on that. So watching this closely from the RDA perspective to ensure that as we're looking at HTRZs within the city, that we are in compliance with any sort of requirements there. The next bill is, and I should say the next three bills that I'm going to bring up are being, there will be several subs on these. These are part of the land use task force bills that were negotiated over the interim. So what you're seeing in these drafts right now will change a bit over the next few weeks as the technical language is ironed out. The first is SB 181, Housing Affordability Amendments. And this really speaks to parking stalls and garages. This doesn't have, that language doesn't have a huge impact on Salt Lake City because we don't have as strict of parking and garage requirements as other cities. This is certainly a really big deal for some of our bedroom communities here in Utah. HB 360 is the housing attainability. Yep.
On the garage one, is that to make it so that cities can't be as strict about garages being required, or which direction does it move the needle on?
Yeah, sorry, that's a good clarifying point. Yes, it removes the requirement to have a garage or a carport.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. HB 360, housing attainability, looks at the moderate income housing plan and some changes around that. It modifies the Utah Housing Corporation, and it also looks at some financing mechanisms on political subdivision owned land. And then HB 368 is the real big kind of technical nuts and bolts legislation by both of these, sorry, are by Representative White, HB 360 and HB 368. And then SB 181 is, I believe, Senator Fillmore's bill. HB 368 addresses a whole host of things that will have a pretty substantial impact on Salt Lake City. Mostly from an operational perspective on our staffing and staff resources. This adds some additional, it makes some changes to land use noticing and property transfers. It adds in some language around transfer of development rights and development standards. It changes the plan review timing and the bonding process, and both of those will have a pretty big impact on our plan review teams. It addresses special districts and identical plans. It makes some small technical changes to the annexation process. And then it also will impact our landscaping ordinance and our ability to withhold a certificate of occupancy around our landscaping ordinances, or I believe also require a bond. And then it also addresses fire access and private maintenance of public infrastructure. This is a really, really long bill and a really technical bill. This will be something really important for the council to keep your eyes on as obviously as we move through the session, but also as we move into the budget process, because this has pretty substantial shot clocks on some of these items, specifically bonding and inspections that could have a pretty profound impact on our plan review teams and staffing. And it also has a penalty associated with it. So if we don't meet the requirements and we don't provide notice on releasing bonds and the time required by this legislation, then we could have to pay a portion of the bond back to the developer. So it's really going to be a pretty, the turnarounds are pretty tight for our teams because we have so much development happening within the city. And then also having that penalty on top of it is pretty challenging. So I want us to keep a close eye on this one just from a staffing perspective and how that may impact our city operations. Any questions on this one?
I have a lot of questions, but could I just meet with you afterwards on that? It sounds like it'll probably take a little more time than we have.
I would welcome that. Yes.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, Kate, anything on the land use bills from your perspective?
Just the one that you were going over with Councilor Mono is like very thick and dense. So
yeah,
you guys can have a lot of fun geeking out on that very thick bill.
Yeah, and Councilmember Mono, we should maybe invite our planning director, Nick Norris, to that discussion as well. Okay, any questions from any of the other council members on land use and housing? The other thing I want to add in that space is Steve Waldrop, the governor's housing innovation advisor, is working on a statewide housing plan and has solicited feedback from the city. In the league emails that we get, you can see that solicitation requests, and I believe the deadline is March 15th. Don't hold me to that date, but I do know it's after the session to provide feedback. So if there's any comments that you guys want to make as a council, we can coordinate that through Nick Tarbett on your team and get those submitted for you, and think through if we want to submit a big city response from both the council and administration. So just putting that on your radar. Just moving to homelessness, we have several bills that we are watching in the homelessness front, always top of mind for the city. The first is HB 118. This is Representative Abbott's bill regarding mitigation funding. This would reduce the amount that non-shelter cities contribute to the mitigation fund. This did not make it out of committee. So continuing to watch this, but I think we'll see another mitigation bill coming down the road from kind of the typical players that work in this homelessness space. HB 329 is Representative Clancy's homeless omnibus bill. This makes changes to mitigation fund and it imposes stricter rules on the homelessness shelter. We're closely working on this bill, both with the representative and with our partners at the Utah League of Cities and Towns and our other shelter cities. HB 362 is from Representative Miller, who is a member of the Salt Lake delegation. This is a bill that he's running on the Homelessness Bill of Rights and offering people experiencing homelessness the right to equal treatment, and creates a private right of action against a person who violates a homelessness individual's rights. So keeping a close eye on this and working with our representative on that. And then the last is SB 182 from Senator Weiler, and this addresses Code Red. So as you may know, over the past few years, we've had several iterations to the Code Blue, which means that we can't abate camps, and we have different requirements when we have Code Blue in place based on temperatures. In the winter, when it's really cold, this swings the pendulum to temperatures when it's really hot and places additional restrictions on camp abatements and different activities that we can do around enforcement when temperatures are really hot or really cold. And this is, of course, a really a big issue for Southern Utah and places like St. George when we have 120-degree temperatures for extended periods of time. It certainly impacts us as well. But any questions on homelessness? I went through that pretty quickly, but happy to speak to any of that. Okay. And then the last thing I just want to touch on is the public safety plan. The city is tracking any bill that touches the concepts within the public safety plan. So we have almost 30 bills that we are watching right now. And I want to caveat that with not every one of those 30 bills impacts city operations. Those 30 bills could be anything from disorderly conduct, addressing dangerous weapons, addressing things at the court level. So all things that we are keeping an eye on, both that would impact city operations, and those kind of fall under our general tracker, versus things that would impact other parts of the homelessness system that impact the public safety plan. So we are watching all of those closely, and also working diligently with the state on implementation of our public safety plan. We have what feels like a record number of bills out right now. We are tracking almost 260 bills, I believe, and I still have quite a few in the queue that came out last night and today to sift. So pretty heavy volume of bills this year. A lot around the public safety, and a lot of bills around impacting the police department and impacting community and neighborhoods and public utilities. So our departments have been wonderful about reviewing bills and helping us understand the impacts to the city. Kate, anything else you want to add? Oh,
on
energy.
Public safety. Oh, JSC. I have the assignment to do energy. There are a number of different energy bills, and I'm going to break them into categories. There are bills that deal with Rocky Mountain Power and investor-owned utilities. There are bills with a particular renewable focus. There is one bill with an emphasis on nuclear, and then there are some that are specific to the Intermountain Power Project. I'm going to focus on the renewable bills and those that deal with Rocky Mountain Power, but I'm happy to answer questions on those other categories if you're interested in those. So there's several different bills in the investor-owned Rocky Mountain Power space that could impact ratepayers in Salt Lake City. The first would be HB 72, electricity rate amendments by Representative Albrecht. This bill deals with removing what's called the energy balancing account. This is another mechanism where costs are passed through to ratepayers. The feeling from the sponsor and the State House, as it passed out unanimously, was that this was a mechanism that was being used for whatever rate recovery Rocky Mountain Power didn't receive from its rate case. It would be potentially moved on through the energy balancing account. And so the legislature is removing the ability for Rocky Mountain Power to use this account at all, stripping it completely from code. The next one I wanted to highlight is HB 201, Energy Resource Amendments, Representative Jack. That was actually heard this afternoon in committee. It deals with what's called an integrated resource plan. This is a plan that is required to be created each year by the utility about their resources and how they're forecasting those in the short term and the long term. And Representative Jack wants to make sure they're doing full cost attribution, excuse me, in particular for renewable projects. Next, HB 212, Grid Enhancing Technologies. Representative Watkins is running this. This is an
So let's see. Who do we have back up here? We had Jen and Sylvia. Yes.